Okay, right. Hello, everybody. Yes, I'm speaking slightly out of schedule. Hopefully, after I've spoken, Barney will be here and he'll be able to give you his paper and we're back on track. I'm telling you about some of the headlines from the State of the Archaeological Market report for year 23-24. Now, normally, would like to be able to publish the full report straight after giving this presentation. It is not quite there. It is written, but it's not been quality assured yet. So it will be forthcoming shortly. But I really hope none of the figures that I'm going to show you are going to change. So, headlines. There we go. Nearly 5,000 people working in commercial archaeology in the UK. And of them, now 86% have permanent contracts. We've also been collecting the data on nationality ever since a particular political thing a few years ago. It is of interest that 88% of people working in commercial archaeology are UK nationals and 9% from EU states. As I think I mentioned in my CEO's presentation yesterday, last year we managed to do things. Of course, this is the year ended end of March 2024. And in that year, the data we got back suggested that salaries rose by at least inflation, as did charge-out rates. Indeed, charge-out rates were typically rising by more than inflation. And this is a better situation than the year before. Remember the year before 22-23, remember how many chancellors of the Exchequer we had then with the inflation at 10%? And we FAME members were carefully trying to protect staff and keeping salary rates going up, but weren't increasing charge-out rates at the same rates. So that wasn't so good for business. Anywho, yes, in what I'm still calling last year, 23-24, that was the average amount of turnover per member of staff in UK organisations. Let's multiply that average amount up by the number of people working in archaeology. That's where we get the estimate of that £337 million of revenue flowed through commercial archaeology in that year. Okay, on to some specifics. There we go. Remember, the numbers I've given so far are often extrapolated from the data we receive. We don't receive a full data set. Of the respondents there, they had 1,650 staff in total. The amount this had grown by in the year before was very small, 1.4%, okay, slightly more than the year before. And this will be something that I'll come back to, that, to be honest, the problem, and what a lot of people have been saying to me here today and yesterday in conversations I've been hearing, is the problem is staff. It is not actually about specific specialisms, it's about staff, it's about pairs of hands. Where can we get some more staff? Can you cross-hire some staff? Where can we get people? Do you know where we can get people? So that's how this then adds into the overall figures that we also have for the number of people working in curatorial, so local government, archaeology, and other sectors. Now you see the number for other has stayed flat since 2020. That's because the data about things that are not commercial archaeology and are not local government are only gathered in the profiling the profession exercises, which only come around about every 5 years. The number for curatorial staff, if you look at the comparison between 23 and 24, big drop, 11% less staff working in curatorial archaeology. And this was a Historic England report, or rather Historic England and Essex Place Services, that just came out just last week, really quite quietly. So the number of people working in commercial archaeology went up a bit. Number of people in curatorial went down much faster, although of course curatorial is much smaller. And so there we see a total estimate for the total number of people working in professional paid archaeology in UK, 6,766. That's a really rather specific estimate. Sorry for being quite so detailed in that. So of whom 73% of archaeologists work in commercial archaeology. There's the graph of the total number of people working in archaeology. This is not just in commercial archaeology, going back to 2007, because we really started gathering these data in earnest at the beginning of the economic crash. And that's what happened at the crash, and that's what happened to archaeology and development way back until we started bouncing back a decade ago. But now look at the top line there. The last three figures are awfully close to each other. We have just stopped growing. We just haven't got the opportunity to expand capacity. And just for a special Fame at 50 reference, okay, here is a longer term graph. Where does Fame get formed? Almost precisely there, and the rescue boom in the 70s. The substantial looking bump in the 1980s, that is, sorry Doug, I'm walking away while you try to point a camera at me. The bump in the 1980s, that's Manpower Services Commission. For those of you that don't know, this was a unemployment relief scheme at the time whereby archaeology was seen as a good thing to put unemployed people to work on, especially as it was nice and visible. Led to a publication backlog, and then the figure after that, this figure down here, using the laser display pointer, I think that figure is rather inaccurate. But after the 80s bounce, and then from 1990, and that's PPG 16, and then we get to the peak. I point over at that peak just before the crash, and then look at the effects of the crash. That's been the biggest thing that has affected commercial archaeology and archaeology since 1990. Because then after that, the implementation of Brexit and COVID don't actually affect the number of people working in archaeology substantially in a way to compare with the economic effects of the crash. Here's the figure on nationalities as gathered every year. There was, I say, 88% of UK subjects. If you look at the figure going back over the last few years, the proportion of people working in commercial archaeology that are from the EU is dropping slowly, but it is. Here's how we calculate some of the figures on turnover. Not every company answered the survey. By the way, just to remind you, this is a survey of FAME members and CIFA registered organizations. There's a lot of overlap there, but it adds up together to give us a survey pot of about 100 organizations. And so the average amount that's being turned over, £3 million. For this year, we got some more data from, for the first time, got multiple responses from companies, FAME members, that are based in Ireland that are reporting in euros. So there's the example of the typical amount that the Irish companies are turning over. So you've seen this number already, a calculation that archaeology, its value to the economy is £337 million flowing through. And this number has actually quite impressively managed to go up. Now, of course, it was kicked up by the hideous inflation years, but it has managed to go up even while staffing numbers have remained relatively static. And here's a table which we saw a different, slightly earlier version of it in an earlier presentation, thinking about which is the sectors that the money is coming from, the work is coming from. Residential development is historically always at the top of this. This is the biggest sector for us. The important changes in recent years that I hope this is showing, transport used to be a much bigger deal than it is now. A lot of that, I'm not looking at anyone from National Highways while I say this, a lot of this had to do with one particular railway. HS2 actually was driving so much of the relative amount that came into us from transport. Transport has fallen away a lot in the last year or two, and energy has gone up. I think this year's energy figure is, I'm not actually super convinced by that because I know just how much work people are doing on renewables and interconnectors. I feel what you say. So remember I was talking about inflation and the rates of salaries going up. I think really quite importantly there, a mean increase to charge out rates of 6.1%. I think that in comparison with the year before, I think this is a good figure. especially when inflation was 3.2%. As I say, the year before, when inflation was up at 10% and charge-out rates were only going up by 4%, nah. And everyone has a lovely guess at what next year's will go up by, but it almost feels irrelevant sometimes because it never survives the first contact of battle. But an estimate that we thought the next year, so of course the next year is now finished and we haven't started collecting data yet, but we will in due course, thought things would go up by 4.7%. So back to salary level changes, as I've kept alluding, these have gone up. And when you look at those figures, 71% of respondents saying that salaries went up by at least inflation. And when you look down the table there, no one said that salaries fell. Now, this is not about individual salaries nor is it about the specific salary bill, but it is about the feeling across the piece, across the employer. So we have had, this is in a year of what is now, I guess, going to be considered relatively normal-ish inflation, although it's higher than Bank of England targets. It's not like the nightmare high levels. And we have managed to increase charge-out rates appropriately, and we've managed to increase salaries appropriately. I think this is good and interesting and useful information. Then profits. We've increased charge-out and we've increased salaries. But the typical profit, the average aggregate profit level for the sector was back down to only 2.5%. And yeah, it's really rather low yet again. I mean, Tim made mention of this in his presentation, as the chair's presentation the other day. We are getting a lot of work. We are charging well for this work, but we're not managing to convert it into and retain it as profits. So this standard question that gets asked every year: do you think the market will improve in this coming year, or will it deteriorate? And there we go. More people thought that the market would improve rather than deteriorate. Not quite a majority of respondents, and not, as you see, only 25 respondents answered this question, but sentiment. So remember, this is essentially how did you feel in March 2024? People felt positive. Looking at that over time, when we look at that graph all the way back to the start, at the start is the onset of the crash. It's awful. A little way into the crash, people begin beginning to feel better. Oh, not so sure. 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. But then sentiment steadily improves into the 2010s. The sentiment improves up to between 2015 and 16, at which point it was announced that a referendum was going to be called. I'm not saying there's a causal or correlation between those two things, but there are lots of political points that you can put on this graph. Sentiment started to deteriorate from that point onwards, all the way down to very low points in 2019, because of course by then actually people were giving responses about, this is a response of how did you feel in March 2020? This is onset of COVID, and we thought it was going to be, it was disastrous, but we thought it was going to be economically disastrous for us, and it turned out that it wasn't. And things were looking better a year into COVID, and things were looking much better coming out of COVID. And then we actually realized, I think people began to get politically concerned again about the sentiment over the last the few years running up to 2024 about the attitudes of government to development, getting down to a very negative point in 23 when we were still more than a year away from general election, and then these data coming in just with the general election around the corner and an expectation that this might lead to change in attitudes to development and so opportunities for work. We asked some standard questions about what do you feel about particular questions. Most people think that a shortage of heritage staff in local planning authorities is a constraint on work. Yep, people have, every time we've asked this question, have thought that. And it's And it is, yeah, it is real, and it's what people think, and it is doubly what we're going to think as we see the number of staff in LPAs dropping. I think the chair of Archaeology UK has actually gone home before I was able to oh, no, thanks, John. So yes, it's just right, John. This is to help, I hope, reassure you that FAME wants to support Algeo because we need you guys there issuing these briefs. And also the big thing that has come up repeatedly in each of the years we've asked this question: have you had vacancies that you've considered to be hard to fill? And people, yes. This is vacancies, and recruitment is identified as the big problem. So that's a canter through the headlines on the report. It will be published in a non-specific amount of time, but quite soon, where you'll be able to download it, access not only those headlines, but all of the other data in there. Thank you very much, SIFA, as co-funder on this project. And with that, I leave it. Thank you.